Many more families are going to
depression era period.
Stock market in the UK
During times of great fear and panic, it can be difficult to see the light at the end of the tunnel, especially in the face of unrelenting news coverage spreading alarming messages of gloom and doom that quickly overshadow any glimmer of hope. Making matters worse, our brains are naturally drawn to these negative headlines. If it bleeds, it leads, as the adage goes. Psychologists call this the negativity bias, which essentially states that our brains are hardwired, by default, to view a glass as half empty, rather than half full. For example, if you run a restaurant, the sting you feel from receiving a 1-star Yelp review is likely far stronger than the satisfaction you get from receiving a 5-star review. The point here is that our brains have a tendency to focus on the negative, in essence, causing us to overlook reasons to stay positive. So, without further ado, let this video serve as a dose of much-needed optimism, as well as an alternative perspective as we explore the positives of pandemics. With more people staying at home than at any time in human history, the number of cars on the road, not to mention planes in the sky, has plummeted. Thick grey smog, which once polluted densely populated cities like Bangkok and Delhi, has been replaced with record levels of clean air, revealing a forgotten blue sky. In fact, for the first time in 30 years, the people of northern India can now see the Himalayan mountains, but the benefits of less pollution aren't merely aesthetic. Like viruses, air pollution is also an invisible killer, one that contributes to the deaths of around 4.2 million people every year. For perspective, that's more than 30 times the number of deaths caused by the coronavirus as of today's numbers. In addition to less pollution due to the absence of traffic, many cities are reporting a sharp decline in car accidents. In Los Angeles, collisions during the month of March were down 27% from the same period last year. In New York City, the number of collisions is even lower, down 38%. Speaking of cars, you may have noticed that the price of gas has recently become remarkably cheap, as in 20-year low kind of cheap. The reason for this is fairly straightforward: supply and demand. Due to government-mandated shutdowns around the world, there simply hasn't been much need for gasoline. So, as global demand falls and oil production remains steady, it only makes sense that the commodity's price has plummeted, which could save you hundreds of dollars this year at the gas pump. From a macroeconomic perspective, the billions of dollars that consumers are expected to save are likely to translate into spending, which will help stimulate the economy and fast-track the end of this recession. Now, of course, oil isn't the only asset whose value has fallen off a cliff. As the global unemployment rate continues to surge, the stock market has responded as you would expect, only this time cratering faster than it did in the 1930s. And although this channel doesn't provide investment advice, history would certainly suggest that unprecedented crises yield unprecedented opportunities. Or, as Baron Rothschild once eloquently put it, the time to buy is when there's blood in the streets. Just like purchasing real estate after the housing collapse of '08, or technology stocks like Microsoft and Apple following the burst of the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s, history echoes that time and again, the most attractive investments have a funny way of appearing in the ugliest of times. Interestingly, many of today's most successful companies were founded during economic downturns. Such was the case during the Great Depression for an entrepreneur named Walt, who started a cartoon production studio to bring joy to a happiness-starved nation, creating films like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Of course, today we know this company as Disney. But perhaps the most encouraging byproduct of COVID-19 is that governments will finally take the threat of future pandemics seriously, as world leaders now learn the hard way that the cost of an outbreak's prevention is measured in billions, whereas the cost of neglect is measured in trillions. Because while it's true that today's pandemic has wreaked unparalleled havoc upon the global economy, the crisis could easily have been much worse. Had the coronavirus been as lethal as Ebola and as contagious as measles, which can be transmitted human to human from over 100 feet away, it's not hard to imagine a death toll that could have wiped out 3% of the world's population, as was the case with the 1918 Spanish flu. We hope that this video shows you that life always has a bright side, if you're willing to look for it. And of course, more than anything, we hope that you stay safe and healthy during these uncertain times. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay smart